The new podcast, In the Shadow of Princeton, starts as the matriarch of a prominent Princeton family is found stabbed to death in her locked basement. Investigators look from a serial attacker to her family to Princeton University students. One hot-blooded investigator sees a conspiracy. Is he way off base, or does privilege let you get away with murder? In the Shadow of Princeton is available wherever you get podcasts, or you can binge it ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello, Beat Check listeners. This is Joe Freeman, senior writer from the Oregonian and Oregon Live, and your host today. It's election season and one of the most contentious and consequential elections in recent memory. And this year, Oregon has become ground zero for one of the most intriguing and potentially important races in the country. It's a race that has enticed millions of dollars from both parties and special interest groups. A race that features two longtime adversaries. A race that could tip the balance of power in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm talking about Oregon's District 5 and the hotly contested race between Republican incumbent Lori Chavez-DeRemer and Democratic challenger Janelle Bynum. Democrats see the 5th District as key in their attempt to retake control of the House of Representatives. Republicans see the 5th District as a way to hold on to their slim majority. It's a race that has put Oregon on the front lines of national politics in the 2024 election. And here to break it all down for us is Sammy Edge, who covers higher education and politics for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Sammy, thanks so much for joining Beat Check today.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, how's your day going?
You know, we're just getting started, but with less than a week from Election Day, my nerves are on alert.
All right. Well, this is a fascinating topic, and I want to get into the background of the candidates. I want to look at District 5 and kind of where the race stands. But first, I'd love for you to kind of offer a little context on this election, give kind of the background for how important this is on the national level. It's so important. House Majority Leader Mike Johnson and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries have both visited Oregon recently to stump for their candidates. Why is this race under the microscope? Why is it such a big deal?
Well, some Oregon political insiders have told me that it's pretty new for the state to be important nationally, right? Oregon is a pretty blue state, and the red seats that we have are pretty firmly red. So the 5th District being such a focal point for the national parties is something new. We did see a little bit of, we saw some national attention around the district back in 2022 when Lori Chavez-DeRemer first ran for the seat. In that race, we had Democrat Jamie McLeod Skinner kind of surprisingly oust the incumbent Democrat, which meant two newcomers were vying for the seat. That was also a very tight race, and Chavez-DeRemer ended up pulling through, and she flipped the seat for Republicans. What we're seeing this time is Democrats really want that seat back. They see Lori Chavez-DeRemer as vulnerable, and I would say vulnerable because it's a split district, not necessarily because of her record in Congress. And so they are pouring tons of money and effort into this to try and get the district back. Hakeem Jeffries, you mentioned he had visited. He told the New York Times earlier this year that he personally encouraged Bynum to get into the race. So from the very top of the ticket, we're seeing, or the top of the Democrat Party, we're seeing a lot of focus on Oregon 5.
Yeah, and there's been just a ton of money poured into the race. And I guess just maybe break that down a little bit. But I mean, from a big picture view, not only is it surprising that it's kind of been thrust into this limelight, but it's because the House is so closely divided in such a close election. I mean, the race kind of mirrors, every major race in the country from the president on down. It kind of is a coin flip. And it's one of like a handful, maybe 5 to 7 races that could sway power in the House, right?
That's totally right. We have over 400 people in the House of Representatives, but only about 12 races this election are rated as toss-ups. This is one of the most hotly contested. Republicans currently only hold the majority by about 4 seats in Congress, so they need to hold on to that. Democrats need to flip several in order to get control, and that's really what they're trying to do here. Republicans want to keep this seat, and Democrats see it as a key flip for them to try and gain the majority. And in terms of outside money coming into this race, I mean, not only are we seeing the candidates raise vast amounts of money, between the two of them, they have pulled in over $12 billion in campaign contributions.
Wow.
But I just checked again this morning, and outside spending on the race. So how that works is, other people can buy advertisements on your behalf. You as the candidate are not supposed to be coordinating with them, but we see, national Democrats, national Republicans, interest groups like the 314 Action Fund that backs scientists and engineers. They will all put money into buying advertising for one candidate or another, which is why you are getting absolutely flooded every time you turn on cable or Hulu for this race. Joe, I checked the numbers this morning. $23 million is the tally at the moment for outside spending in this race.
Well, that's incredible. It has to be a record. I mean, it's you think of Oregon as this kind of liberal bastion, but it's pretty fascinating that both parties really see this as such an important race. On the other hand, too, what is I guess kind of adds a layer to the intrigue is just the background of these candidates. Like, this isn't their first face-off. On paper, they have a lot of things in common. They're both women of color, they're mothers, they're business owners, they're veteran politicians, and amazingly, they both live in Happy Valley. But they know each other well, having faced off in 2016 and 18 in Oregon House races. How did those races unfold? Who won those? And I guess just maybe we could kind of delve into their backgrounds a little bit and their history.
Sure, absolutely. Well, if our listeners have paid attention to any of the 3 debates that these candidates have staged in this race, they know that there is some serious fire between these two women. This is the 3rd time that they're facing off. Lori Chavez-DeRemer and Janelle Bynum both competed for the same House seat back in the 20-teens. Janelle Bynum won that race twice, the last 2 times they faced off. However, what really carried her to victory was voters in Multnomah County. And Oregon's 5th district, it's a really wonky shape. It covers some really weird ground. It basically goes from Milwaukee and Lake Oswego south to like the Albany area. And then it's got this funky little tail that shoots east and it grabs Bend and Redmond. So there's a lot of rural territory in the district. And the most important voters in this race are going to be in Clackamas County. So really performing well there is going to matter a lot. Both of the candidates are pretty familiar with Clackamas County. Lori Chavez-DeRemer is the former mayor of Happy Valley. Janelle Bynum lives in Happy Valley as well, like you mentioned. So it'll be really interesting to see which way the district sways.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the importance of Clackamas. It's something like Clackamas County is like 41% of the voters, I think. So it's pretty incredible that two women of color in that area, which I believe is a pretty predominantly white area, are up for this race. And I mean, just the importance on Clackamas County in general. I assume they backed DeRemer pretty heavily during her previous race, but hers was it was obviously a bit of an upset. And she was the first Republican woman elected to represent Oregon in the U.S. House. Isn't that right?
That is how I understand it. Yes. She was also, she and Andrea Salinas were both elected in 2022. They were our first ever Latinas in Congress.
Okay.
If Janelle Bynum is elected, she will be our first ever Black lawmaker representing the state in Congress.
Yeah, it's amazing. As I understand it, DeRemer, kind of one of her big selling points, I know that, Bynum's campaign has kind of, portrayed her as a Trump backing, hardcore right wing candidate, but she kind of has deflected that a little bit and pointed to her record in Congress where she's co-sponsored a ton of bills and all that kind of stuff. Is that kind of one of her selling points? And what else is she kind of, I don't know, what's her pitch to voters, Ben?
Sure, absolutely. You will see both candidates in this election trying to make the other person sound like the very extreme member of their party, and both of them saying, look at me, I'm a centrist. Here are all the times I've worked across the aisle. I would say that I don't see either of them as the far extreme of their party. They both have examples of being more moderate and working across the aisle. Lori Chavez-DeRemer is ranked Oregon's most bipartisan politician in Congress. I think she was ranked something like 29th in the House of Representatives in terms of willingness to work across the aisle.
Interesting.
Her team says that she's been on 300 bills and that 84% of them have been bipartisan. I mean, that's a lot of bills. You can sign on as a co-sponsor to several bills. She was not the main sponsor of all 300, and I did not look at all 300 myself. But I did look at the few dozen that she has sponsored, and a fair number of those have been bipartisan as well. So you do see her with this record of working across the aisle. Of course, people are loyal to their parties as well, so you're going to see that too. Has
she been like a popular figure during her term? Has she been well liked in the district?
That's a great question for voters. I guess we're going to find out.
We'll find out right
next week.
Yeah. And what about Bynum? Now, why would Mr. Jeffries recruit her, and what did he identify in her? And obviously, she served in the Oregon House, having bested DeRemer those 2 times, as you mentioned. But what's kind of her pitch? What's her selling points there?
Sure. Bynum has been in the Oregon legislature for about 8 years. I would say that she really has established herself as a leader in some areas. She is a leader in the party. She challenged Tina Kotek to be House Speaker, several years ago. She did not win that, but the fact that she was willing to put herself up there as a leader, and one of the major players in that contest, I think speaks to her ambition and her leadership values. She has done several things in the Oregon legislature that are noteworthy, and she talks about them frequently on the campaign trail. Recently, she got a huge investment in Oregon's semiconductor industry passed. That is supposed to bring millions into the state and create thousands of new jobs. So she talks about that quite a bit. She also has been an advocate for funding more mental health practitioners who are people of color. So that is an area where she has stood out. And she was a leader in 2021 on many police reform bills in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. She talks about those a little bit. Lori Chavez-DeRemer will come after her. You'll hear in the debates about, calling her soft on crime. That's kind of been a sticking point in this race. The truth of it is the Bynum really did have backing from police unions and bipartisan support on several of those bills. Certainly not all of the bills made everybody happy.
They never do.
They never do. You'll hear the police unions talk about their dissatisfaction in particular around a bill that stops them from being able to pull people over just because they're missing a tail light or something. So, there's some frustration there. The OrCops union, which represents many of Oregon's police and sheriffs, is backing Chavez-DeRemer in this race. And they have backed Democrats in other races this cycle. So
Yeah, I noticed that conversely, Bynum does have pretty strong support from, obviously state and national Democrats, but a bunch of powerful labor unions as well. I think the SEIU and nurses and teachers and the AFL-CIO. I guess that's to be expected with a Democratic candidate, but I guess it's just this background that makes her so appealing for those groups.
Yeah, she does have labor support from the big public unions. Chavez-DeRemer will also talk about how she has labor support. That's also true. You see a lot of the blue collar unions lined up behind her. So, and that is a little bit unusual for a Republican to be able to court that union support. So I do think it's one way that she kind of demonstrates her willingness to, break the trend from her party a little bit.
It's just so fascinating that the epicenter of this national, such a heated national race is come down to this strange district. I mean, you kind of mentioned the district, but it's like part of Portland and goes out to Bend and way south, like you mentioned, toward it. What's the makeup of kind of the district? Is it mostly Democrat? Is it mostly Republican? Is it kind of mixed?
It's pretty mixed. And a huge chunk of the voters are not affiliated with either party. We really see that actually in many of Oregon's congressional districts, that the largest chunk of voters is not affiliated one way or another. So, we're all kind of in the dark about how they're going to vote. So it's a pretty mixed district in Oregon 5.
Got you. You kind of mentioned the debates, and I know they were fiery, and it's probably safe to say that these two accomplished women don't really care much for each other. Give us some of the highlights that you took away from the debates, and whether or not they struck a chord with voters is to be determined. But what were kind of some of the biggest fireworks that developed there?
Yeah, one thing that stands out to me is you see Lori Chavez-DeRemer many times really trying to pin all of Oregon's failures on Janelle Bynum as a state lawmaker. So she really comes after her for the drug crisis, for Measure 110. And for our listeners, Measure 110, of course, was the voter-approved referendum that decriminalized drug possession, right? So Bynum as a lawmaker didn't really have anything to do with getting that through for voters. She did endorse it, but she said that she did so grudgingly. So I don't think it's quite accurate to say that Bynum was a huge champion for Measure 110. She also did vote to repeal it this year, along with many other Democrats. You see Janelle Bynum again saying that Lori Chavez-DeRemer is, a rubber stamp for Republicans and a huge fan of Donald Trump. I also think that's probably a bit of an overcharacterization. We've talked about the ways that Lori goes across the aisle. And another point of contention has been Lori Chavez-DeRemer's stance on abortion. In this race, she has said many times that after the Supreme Court decision around abortion, she thinks that this is an issue of states' rights and that she would not try to change policy in Oregon or support a national ban on abortion. She did in 2022, take more of a hardline stance and say that she would back, a heartbeat bill, which is a bill that would ban abortion as soon as you can detect a heartbeat, which, happens super early on in pregnancy, like usually within the second month. So you've seen her. I would say she's backed off that a little bit and said Oregon voters have made themselves clear they support abortion, and I won't touch that.
Interesting. And this was a district that supported Biden in the previous presidential election. So I guess I wonder, her supporting Trump with that combined with kind of the abortion issue there, it kind of makes you, I mean, those could potentially be, it's these small bullet points that could sway this election. I wonder how that might affect the district. The district, when she won it 2 years ago, was, it was redrawn, right? It was part of a redistricting for the state. Is that accurate?
That is true. The redistricting happened early in the 2020s, and the district got redrawn a little bit. We also got a new district, Oregon's 6th which is a neighbor to this one. But
sure. Okay. And so I guess in what ways did that kind of, tinker with the calculus of who and how the people a candidate can win that race? Did it affect it at all, or is it pretty much the same kind of voting district that it's been in recent years?
Man, I wish I could answer all these questions. If my boss Betsy Hammond was on the call, she could recite all of the statistics. I was not covering our congressional races then, so I'm not entirely sure. But we had Democrat Kurt Schrader representing this district for a long time, and I think the surprise of the 2022 race was that in the primary he got ousted by Jamie McLeod Skinner, who was slightly more liberal than Kurt Schrader and won the Democratic nominee. So that changed the calculus of the race, and I think opened the door perhaps for Lori Chavez-DeRemer, because she wasn't running against an incumbent anymore. It was two newcomers in the race. This time, of course, Bynum is facing a bit of an uphill battle. Anybody is when they take on an incumbent. Typically that plays out in fundraising. Incumbents usually have a lot more money than their challengers. What's really been kind of eye-catching in this race is that with the backing of national Democrats and Democratic groups like Emily's List and the DCCC, Bynum has at this point actually outraised Lori Chavez-DeRemer. In the last quarter before the election, she took in like $3.4 million, which is enormous. Wow. And her campaign says it's the most any congressional candidate in Oregon has ever taken in one quarter.
That's fascinating. And if when I was kind of reading some of your stuff, in preparation for this, that's kind of a flip, because at the beginning, DeRemer had clearly was outpacing Bynum in fundraising, and then Bynum kind of had the mid to late surge there. Is that just a faction of the importance of the race, or was that a calculated decision, or is just kind of just Democrats trying to push her over the finish line?
I would guess probably the latter. She first had to beat Jamie McLeod Skinner for the Democratic nomination. So, I do think we saw Bynum take in more money once she was, effectively declared the Democratic candidate. So she got a summer surge, I would say, because of that. And that's really when we started to see a lot of the national firepower pouring in to help her. Also, because Lori Chavez-DeRemer is an incumbent, she started with a bigger war chest than Bynum did. She had some reserves on hand. So that certainly gave her a lead in fundraising at the start.
Yeah, that makes sense. So here we are on approaching the election here. It seems like it's been a neck and neck race from the moment these candidates, started this race. I think DeRemer certainly had a leg up to begin with, as you mentioned, as the incumbent, but it's kind of been labeled a toss up from the beginning and continues to remain a toss-up. Is there a sense of where things stand? Polls and nonpartisan groups seem to suggest it's a dead heat, but how tight are we talking, and where do things stand right now?
If only I could answer my job.
It seems
my
like
job
the question
Tuesday.
of the election, right? At every level.
The latest public poll we had in this race was, I think, back in September, and it was really a dead heat. The candidates were basically tied within the margin of error. I don't expect that has changed too much. And, what that means for me, what it means for voters is that we are not likely to know the outcome of this on Tuesday night. I think it'll be a surprise if voters are so decisive that we can answer this on election night. It could very well push into the weekend before we have an answer.
Wow. What about, from a personal standpoint, covering this race and these candidates? What's that been like? Has it been, I imagine there's a range of emotions, but just, I guess just in the weeds, what's it been like covering this, this race that's under the microscope nationally? Yeah,
it's been interesting. I mostly cover state politics, and I'm still somewhat new to covering state politics. So to start dealing with these national interest groups, these national campaign folks, has been new. Things operate a little differently in Washington than here, so we've had to kind of figure out each other's expectations. I will say, too, that you see a ton of mudslinging in this race. Mm-hmm. It's not one of those friendly contests where people are nice to their opponent and try to politely carve separate paths. So that's taken a lot of fact checking, trying to get to the bottom of, okay, one party's saying this, is that accurate? What's actually happened? Okay, the other party says this. What's accurate? What's actually happened? So it's certainly, listeners, take those campaign commercials with a grain of salt and go look at some of the fact check reporting on either side.
Do you get a sense that, I mean, it's clear from an outsider that the candidates don't care much for one another. Is that like just a faction of their history, do you think, in their background and in competing in multiple races and in competing again here? Or is it just a personal thing or is it politics, or kind of all of the above? Because like you said, there's been a lot of mudslinging in this one.
I don't know. I've never been in the room during one of their debates. I've never really seen them interact much with each other. So I don't know if they actually dislike each other personally, or if they are just both, strong, fierce politicians who are willing to, have strong and fierce showings at these debates to get their points across. Yeah,
it's interesting. Well, is there anything else before we wrap up here that we should let listeners know about? It's such a fascinating thing. It just feels like a little window into the entire thing that's going on nationally, and it's just fascinating that it's here in our backyard.
Yeah, I don't know. I would just emphasize, take campaign commercials with a grain of salt. Go read some of our reporting. OPB and Capitol Chronicle have also covered this race really closely, and don't expect to have an answer on Tuesday night. We will keep you informed.
No, I want answers now. I need them
so
now,
do I,
Sammy.
Joe.
I need them now.
I keep telling people, I'm so excited for Wednesday when I can take a deep breath, and it's like, wait, no, actually.
maybe the following Wednesday.
That's right.
Maybe the second Wednesday in November. Yeah,
that's right.
Well, Sammy, this has been an excellent conversation. I can't thank you enough for joining the show. We'll definitely be following the results of District 5 and all of the other statewide election results very closely. If you're interested in reading more about this race and the background of these two candidates, I'll go ahead and drop some links to Sammy's coverage in the show notes. So please check those out. And thank you so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this episode, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this one is with a subscription to the Oregonian and Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time, I'm Joe Freeman, and this was Beat Check.